Good evening. I'm Susan Miller, and I am a co-chair of our Domestic Violence Task Force here in Garland County. And we have representatives from people and agencies and organizations from all over our community that attend a weekly meeting. And we were invited by the Garland County Library to address some issues that have been of significant importance in our community, and that is domestic violence, but additionally, some concerns about suicides and homicides within our community. And so we have a wonderful panel here, and I will introduce them after Ms. Ashley Walker does a presentation. Ashley is part of our Domestic Violence Coalition, which is housed in Little Rock, Arkansas. And Ashley is over the homicide division of our coalition. So anyway, I want to say welcome and thank you all so much for being here, and I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Ashley Walker.
Hello, I'm Ashley Walker. I am the Domestic Violence Homicide Prevention Specialist for the Arkansas Coalition Against Domestic Violence. So I have a really long title for a really long name, but at the end of the day, it's to kind of bring awareness to the homicides that are happening across our state, and kind of try to help maybe prevent one or two. I know we're not going to eradicate them all the way, but at least if we can help maybe one, that's kind of my biggest goal right now. So I'm going to go over a quick PowerPoint. It's not super lengthy. It's just kind of domestic violence in Arkansas. So I just want to give you guys some statistics and kind of what we're looking at across the state. So does anybody know who the coalition is? Before I get started, I'll kind of go through that. Does anybody know who we are? Except for Mr. Manor, she didn't get to say that. So we are a technical support agency. We have 30 member programs, and Washington Youth and Family Services is part of that. So we do, if they have anything weird, we will give them advice on how to handle that. We do a lot of technical assistance within those shelters. We do a lot of legislative work. We do a lot of training. My predominant role is a lot of training. So yeah, I've been in training for 4 days this week, so I'm like, oh my goodness. Yeah, and so at the end of the day, it's actively to fight to increase the rights and resources for victims of domestic violence. Yeah, so trying to make sure all of the shelters in our program or in our coalition as part of a member of our program, they serve everybody no matter race, age, sexual orientation. We don't care. If you are a victim of domestic violence, our programs will help serve you. So, Arkansas in review. So these are our 2022 numbers. We don't really have 2023 numbers as of right now, so we kind of do the year before. Total hotline calls to our 30 member programs, 23,471. That's a lot of calls. That number is actually up exponentially. I don't know the exact percentage rate on that. But yeah, it's pretty high up there. Our face-to-face crisis interventions, 19,814. That number is also up. I want to say 2020, 2021, they were around the 14,000, 16,000 range. So we can see a huge increase in people actually wanting shelter services or just resources in general. Unmet requests for services, 3,940. I love this number. I think this number, I don't love that it's that big. But I love telling people about this number just because that's almost 4,000 people who did not get services. That's a huge testament to funding and just resources in general, that there are people lacking. That's no fault of a shelter or a fault of the community or anything like that. It's just the funding is not there. The resources are just not there. So I love showing people this number. I think it's a really impactful number. Total bed nights spent, so that's 95,483. That number seems huge compared to the hotline calls and people actually coming in. But if you think of a family of 5 who comes in and they're staying 4 nights, I mean, that's 20 right off the top. So that's where that big number comes in. 42,290, so 45% of those 95,000 bed nights were provided to clients that are ages 12 and under. So that's almost half, right? And so that's usually a parent coming in with multiple children. And then the increase in unmet requests was up 97%. So that just means that the lack of resources is just huge right now. So yeah, you can see the huge correlation between the numbers and then how big it just really kind of went up. Does anybody have questions? I feel like I'm like flying through all of this. Any questions? So we're gonna go into the domestic violence deaths. So 2022, we had 46 confirmed. This just means that this is what I could find, or my coalition could find. We have a lot of partnerships with law enforcement agencies that give us that information, sometimes willingly, sometimes not, but I've tried really, really hard over the years to build those relationships within the law enforcement community. I predominantly work with law enforcement. I love law enforcement. I think they're trying their best and they're doing what they can and they're doing what they can, right? So we know that it's not a full-on accurate number, but it's as big as I can get, right? It's as much as information that I can get. So that was 27 women, 16 men, and 3 children. Currently, we rank number 4 across the United States for domestic violence homicides. We've pretty much been consistent in the top 5 for about the last 6 years. So yeah, it's kind of heart-wrenching, I guess is the right word, because we know that agencies across the state are doing what they can, but they're doing what they can, right? So intimate partner homicides, I count all of the homicides. So when I do that, in the law, it states a certain thing, right? It's not just husband and wife and boyfriend and girlfriend and whatever, a child in common or whatever it may be. So I count the full number and then I break down intimate partner only. So intimate partner only was 26 killed by a spouse or former spouse. And then 12 of those across the state were murder-suicides. I think it's on the next slide, but that's a pretty high number, and we're pretty consistent on our murder-suicides across the state. And it just kind of is one of those things that we didn't start counting murder-suicides until, I want to say 2016, 2017. And that's just because of the way the laws changed and then how just our perception has changed, right? So with that, we'll go to this first. Trying to think of where I wanted to go with that. 1 in 2 female murder victims and 1 in 13 male murder victims are killed by intimate partners. And then 9 out of 10 murder-suicides involve a gun. Intimate partner violence, it's like 1 in 3 women, 1 in 4 men at this point. So they will experience intimate partner violence at some point in their lifetime. So if you just think about what the people that are in this room, there's a good chunk of us, or know somebody who has, right? Nationwide, an average of 3 women are killed per day from a current or former partner. 2021, intimate partner violence accounted for 20% of all violent crimes. That's a good chunk of violent crimes that's happening, that it's just straight intimate partner. Murder-suicide, so 72% of all murder-suicides involved an intimate partner. Why we started counting these is because we knew the correlation between intimate partner, weapons, and how that all broke down, right? So we really took a look at that and we really saw the amount of people who were being killed by murder-suicides, and we're like, let's look deeper into that. And so when we started looking deeper into that, they were either current partners or they were previous partners or had some sort of like a child in common and they had some sort of an intimate partner relationship on that. 94% of those victims of those crimes are female, and then 81% of the murder-suicides are in the home or in the home that was shared with the partner. In 2020, 670 murder-suicide involved a gun. I think there was a total of 1,500 across the United States. I want to say it was 1,500. I can't fully remember, but it was about 1,500. So if you think a little under half involved a weapon of some kind of gun. And then currently, I looked up the numbers the other night, and currently we sit at 8 that are in Arkansas so far, and it is the beginning of June. I know you guys had 2 pretty close back to back, and those 2 are accounted for in that 8. So that's a pretty scary number considering we're only the beginning of June. I can only imagine what number we're going to be at by the time the end of the year rolls around. Murder-suicide perpetrators are more likely to be married, cohabitating, separated, or divorced. So that goes along with that intimate partner again. So signs to look for. These are not 100% telltale signs of what's going to happen, that a murder-suicide is going to happen. It's just kind of one of those things that if you see one thing and you see another thing kind of going in together, that's when we need to take a step back and be like, hold on a minute. Hold on a minute. Those are some red flags. We need to kind of see what's happening around there. So incidents of escalating domestic violence, we know that once a domestic violence situation starts to escalate, which they all do, that's a huge red flag. And that's a big lethality factor. Batterer seeking and maintaining power control over the female. I know it's in there, but we don't want to always just gender neutralize, right? So it's not always just the female who is who's the one that could be possibly murdered. We know that more so, especially if we go back to the numbers from 2022, more men are being murdered every single day. So the relationship characterized by possessiveness. We know when somebody's possessive over another person, they don't find value in human life. They don't find value in their partner. And when you don't find value in your partner, it's easy to harm something that you don't find value in. The police contact. So has law enforcement been out there before? Is there an order of protection? Is there a no contact order? When people are deciding that they have had enough and they do actually call law enforcement and say, I want violence to stop right now. And they do get an order of protection, or if there is a criminal case and they do get a no contact order placed on their person, the risk factors, because now that person's even more, I don't want to say anger is not the right word, but that whole possessiveness is being taken away from them. Their person is being taken away from them. They're not allowed to have any contact with their person, and that really just agitates them even more. The presence of firearms in a home. I think on the next slide we'll go over that, but the use of weapons in household disputes. So this kind of goes along with putting fear into somebody, like putting a gun on a table and daring your partner to leave, pulling the gun out and just setting it and not saying a word, but just setting it off to the side. That's a whole use of intimidation and coercion in and of itself, right? Entrapment or isolation of the partner in the residence. So not letting them leave, not letting them have a job, not letting them go out and be their whole human person that they want to be. And then, so we know that if there's a fire in the home, the chance of death is 500 times more likely to happen. This could either be the victim dying, it could be the perpetrator dying, or it could be a murder-suicide where it both happens. The most dangerous time for somebody to leave is the most dangerous time is when somebody is trying to leave or is on their way out. Within the next year, they are 75 times more likely to leave to die during that time. That's a huge number. And that number is why shelters are very protective of their clients and of their space. Do you have questions? I'm like flying through this. I'm so sorry.
Well, does anybody have a question that you want to ask at this point? I think it's okay for you to fly.
Okay.
Let me say, there are a lot of thoughts and questions that I'm having as Ashley is going through her PowerPoint. And what really excites me is in my head, I'm kind of making mental notes, some things I want to contribute to and I'm sure everybody in here does too. So fly away.
Okay, well, I only have a few more.
Conversation.
So let me go back to the ACAD staff. Like I said, we do a lot of training. We have provided this is just kind of an approximate number, but we've done about 300 trainings across the state last year, and I'm guessing we'll probably double that number this year. I know that a lot of people in my office, we are gone constantly. I maybe see my office once a week if I'm lucky, but it's just because there's such a need right now, and there's so many people who are very, they're wanting it to stop in their communities, and they're trying to figure out how to help. So, all of our people in our offices are out doing trainings all the time. We barely see each other. So if you happen to call our office and nobody answers, that's why, because we're so small. We only have 6 people in our office. And so if we're all out doing a training on the same day, nobody's answering that phone. So email us if you have a question. We are far more likely to answer an email than our phone in our office. It's not because we don't want to talk to you. It's just, we are busy bees. So Domestic violence is prevalent in every community. It affects all people regardless of age, socioeconomic status, sexual orientation, gender identity, race, religion, nationality. At the end of the day, domestic violence doesn't care. Domestic violence doesn't care what you want to happen or what you don't want to happen, right? Domestic violence is going to happen to people when it happens. It's not like a choice somebody makes. It just kind of happens. One day it sneaks up on you. Absolutely, it does. It can be a result of physical injury, psychological trauma, and even death. The devastating consequences of domestic violence can cross generations and last a lifetime. So, I'm done.
Thank you, actually.
No problem.
And I think the information that you just provided to us is really going to be a catalyst for our
Absolutely.
conversation. And one of the things that we're hoping that happens tonight, and I kind of reference this as a town hall kind of meeting where we look at what services we've got available in our community, but we also have that opportunity to communicate with each other and brainstorm, if you will. I don't think we're going to walk away tonight with the answer to domestic violence within our community, but we've got some amazing people on our panel here who are going to offer some information about their resources and also be available for your questions. I'm going to back up just a little bit and talk about the task force. We meet on the last Monday of every month. Right, Sharon? The last Monday of every month at 8:30 in the morning at Washington Behavioral Health and Wellness in their conference room. We would welcome anybody to join us. We look at what we can do kind of annually as a community. If you go into a restaurant and you see the hotline number on the mirror in the bathrooms, that was the result of the task force mission a couple of years ago. This year, we've developed some safety plans, which I think are really, really important, and that kind of goes to what Ashley was talking about in terms of when victims plan to leave, that you can't just pack a bag and walk out the door and feel like you're going to be okay, because it increases, 75% more likely for violence to occur. So what I'm going to do is quit talking and introduce some of the people that are on our panel, and I'm going to start with China Scott. China is, and I'm going to read from my notes, she is the program director of Washington Family Center. She has a master's degree in developmental therapy from Henderson State University. And she's going to talk about her services as we get through this. And I'm going to tell you guys, when I first got interested in domestic violence, it was because I worked at National Park College. And on my very first day, I walked out the door and saw a young woman being thrown from her car and books being thrown at her. And I went, what is that? But we talk about that power differential. We talk about, people and their insecurities and wanting to maintain that power. And it was at that point that I recognized that domestic violence was everywhere and we needed to do something. At that time, we didn't have a shelter. And so we were sending our people to Little Rock and to Arkadelphia. And so we're so glad China's here to talk about her services. Excuse me. We have Christy Stevens, who is here from Washington Behavioral Health and Wellness. She's an LCSW and she is an outpatient therapist. She's been practicing, actually, I love this. Christy said, I've been practicing more years than I can count. And so we'll just make up a number on that. But she has been a mental health professional for about 13 years, and she's a clinical person at Washington Behavioral Health and Wellness. And we'll talk a little bit about maybe substance misuse and the impact of that on DV. And then we have our prosecuting attorney, Michelle Lawrence. And Michelle, she's the prosecuting attorney for the 18th Judicial District East. It was elected in 2017, but I heard you reference that you were assigned in 2001 as I started in 97. 97. Okay.
Everybody add that as long as I can remember.
I know. 1990, that'd be 1997. I did the same thing. I was like, oh my gosh. But anyway, in 2001, she was assigned to the position of the Division Chief of Garland County Circuit Court, Division 4, where she's responsible for maintaining for the administration of attorneys and department staff. Assigned to Division 4, but also she was responsible for the caseload that encompassed some of the most serious and violent crimes in our county. In 2010, Ms. Lawrence was assigned the additional duty of Chief of Staff, supervised the daily operations of the prosecuting attorney's office, and was promoted to the chief deputy prosecuting attorney in 2015. We're so grateful for you because I think without all of us here, we would be really up a creek in terms of being able to provide services and keeping people safe and protected. We have Leah Gaines here. She's an LPC. Lee Gaines. I'm so sorry, Lee. What's that A at the end of your name there for?
There's no H.
Miss Lee Gaines, who's wonderful, and she is a mental health professional at Washington Behavioral Health and Wellness. She's a licensed marriage and family therapist and has over 20 years of experience in providing compassionate therapeutic care to adults with histories of trauma, self-harm, eating disorders, and grief. Lee is experienced in treating depression, bipolar disorder, anxiety, PTSD, and has lots of really cool certifications. I practice saying this one, psychotraumatologist, and certified clinical trauma professional level 2, technology assistant counselor. Does that mean you do online?
That's my whole practice.
That's her whole practice is telehealth. And it's a very successful way to access services. And Lee is through Washington Behavioral Health and Wellness. Anyway, Lee serves on the Domestic Violence Task Force, as does China, and also on the Hot Springs Human Trafficking Task Force. And so last but not least is Detective Thomas Plummer. He is here in Hot Springs as a detective in the Violent Crimes Unit with the Criminal Investigations Division of our Hot Springs Police Department. For the past 3 years of his nearly 10 years of law enforcement career, he's worked with Criminal Investigations Division. And as a detective, he previously worked as the primary crimes against children investigator and is currently assigned to homicide investigation. These people all have amazing stories to tell that they don't get to. But I am going to put out there some questions, and I'm going to start with our prosecuting attorney, Michelle Lawrence, and you know, we heard Ashley talk about the prevalence of domestic violence within our state, within our country, but specifically within our county. How prevalent is domestic violence in our community?
It's very, very prevalent. When I began 27 years ago, almost 27 years ago, and I started as a prosecuting attorney, I viewed it mainly as domestic battery, where people would get in fights with each other, husbands and wives, little tiffs. But unfortunately, over the years, some of my most horrendous and memorable homicides that I've had to deal with are from individuals that were in relationships with each other. It is very prevalent in the light of COVID, in the light of social media, I believe. It has increased. And unfortunately, I think Ashley mentioned that we recently had 2 murder-suicides that were all based in domestic violence here in our community just a few months ago. So, which really shook a lot of us. So it's unfortunately it's very prevalent in Hot Springs, but I think as Ashley pointed out, it's very prevalent everywhere.
Thank you for that response, and we'll go back to that in terms of at the end when we all put our heads together about what we can do as a community to support people. We'll go back to that. And so, Lee, can I ask you this question? What impact do you feel like domestic violence has on our social and economic well-being?
Well, in any given week, I have dealt with 2 to 3 situations. And I think the biggest impact is that the survivors are not believed. And it's, you know, the courts are like, you need anger management, you need anger management. I'm like, no, they don't. They manage their anger very well.
Yeah.
Otherwise, they would have tapped out in court. And, you know, like going to the school, and the principal's like, well, y'all get along real well. You know, why are y'all squabbling over this child? And it's like, we're being nice in public. But, you know, the second the meeting ends, who knows what's going to happen? And, you know, I truly, truly believe if we had more education and, you it's just not something that happens over there. I don't see it in my round, my circle, so it must not be happening. But it literally happens every single day. And, when I have someone come in my office, I'm like, thank you for having the courage to ask for help. And, and yes, it has an economic impact because, no, you can't leave the house. You can't work. What do you mean you need money? I gave you money yesterday. And, oh my gosh, we're spending more money on groceries. What happened to the groceries you bought 2 weeks ago? And so it impacts every aspect of society.
I do think about students at the college that are making the effort to get college educations and are stopped because of the difficulties in the relationship with their partners. Thank you for sharing that. We've got a little sign. I don't know if those of you out in technology land can see, but we have a little sign up here that says silence conceals violence. And I think your point, Lee, of everybody looks really nice to each other in court or in the community or in schools, but the reality really is often people treat strangers better than they treat the people that they love or are intimate with. Thank you.
Well, Susan, you mentioned, I know that you specifically mentioned the case that got you involved and interested in domestic violence. I was familiar with that female, and I prosecuted the gentleman 5 times and sent him to the penitentiary. And he would continue to get out, and it would go back, the cycle would begin again. And what, fortunately, she survived, and fortunately, she's doing very well, but what really upset the offender at the end was that she took a stand to get an education for herself and to be able to provide for herself, and that was the breaking point for him. And she, despite everything that the legal system tried to do to help her, the encouragement of people who brought her in and told her that she had enough value to make it on her own was what stopped the violence in that situation. So law enforcement can do all it can do, but the people who are actually working, like Lee, with those individuals and giving them the belief and the understanding that they don't deserve that is truly phenomenal and recognizable.
And the other heartbreaking thing is, he had to do this 5 times before he went to jail. But the problem is the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th woman is like, oh, well, I can change him. I can be the good person to him. These other women were not good to him. If I'm good to him, he's not going to be there.
Well, and as a community, we'll talk at the end about what we can do as a community, but in reference to that particular young lady who I believe is very successful today, she was actually kicked out of her house the day after by her landlord, because the landlord was tired of all of the violence and all of the fighting that was going on. So, as a community,
there were no contact orders. He went to prison 5 times.
Yeah.
He would get out and come back, and then it would all start again.
So it's the community, as a whole community, whether you're renting to someone or you're giving them a pair of tennis shoes. I can remember, when you leave your home, you leave behind your stuff, and that kind of a small effort can make a real difference in the life of people who are trying to get that independence. And so, Christy, this is kind of a question that's hiding the substance misuse piece to it, but my question is, what are the public health or safety issues that are affecting our community? And if you could address a little bit about the role of the clinicians at Hall in terms of dealing with substance abuse, that would be awesome.
I think we've talked a little bit already about the public health and safety and the way that just domestic violence impacts the community as a whole. The cost of criminal justice, the cost of healthcare, the cost of mental health. We look at statistics that show us, and somebody mentioned this earlier in our little prequel, that children who are raised in homes where violence is perpetuated, then they often perpetuate violence because that's what they've learned. So we see that as a continuing saga. Domestic violence and substance abuse is so intertwined, you can't statistically break out. It's like which came first, the chicken or the egg. to look at the two things together. But does substance abuse increase in situations where domestic violence? Statistics show us that women begin to drink more, that the more frequent use. I think the last statistic that I looked at, somewhere between 60 to 85% of women who enter shelters report substance abuse.
And
Is that
sometimes that's not always by choice.
correct?
Sometimes it's not always by
Correct.
choice. Yeah.
So I think that those are things that we have to keep in mind, is it something that stemmed from the domestic violence? Is it something that started because two people got together when they were using, and then the violence increased during that time? At Watchdog Behavioral Health, one of the things that we are attempting to do is to work with other community agencies to be able to provide services for all the clients that we see, but to be able to provide that substance abuse piece. We do have a medication-assisted therapy program that we're very proud of, that's growing every day. We do have 2 clinicians currently that are focused on substance abuse with the clients that they see. But that's there's going to be an advertisement, shameless plug for another therapist, because it is such a growing problem in our community. One of the things that we do find out is when we begin to treat the substance abuse, then we begin to uncover the domestic violence. I had a client in my office today that we worked together for a long time now. And when she first came in to see me, she didn't recognize the fact that she was living in an environment where she was being abused. And once we began to define that for her, she's now no longer in that environment. But that's what we often find when we begin to work with people who come in and begin to treat the substance abuse, then they're no longer willing to accept the situations that they're living in.
Christy, thank you. I think you brought to the conversation something that we all know, but how multi-layered domestic violence is. There's not a pamphlet, there's not a meeting, there's not a person. It really is that thing that requires, I think, this community approach to not being silent, to talking about it, to doing what we can do in places where we are to address that very complicated situation. Thank you so much. And Detective Plummer, this is a hard question, but I'm going to ask it to you. What parts of our community are being affected by domestic violence?
So it's hard to isolate any one particular thing because, as we've all mentioned, this is a very complicated matter. So we're dealing with it at every level, from our kids to our elderly folks in shelters. And when we're dealing with something from all fronts, it becomes complicated, either as ourselves as law enforcement, but to address any one particular issue. We're chasing fires, essentially, quite literally going from one incident to the next. It's very hard to point to one particular facet. I'll tell you myself, I gravitate towards children, and we see often an increase in summertime of issues in the household, in the residence, because we've got this increased time together. We've got parents maybe used to time away from the kids, and a lot of extra stressors and a lot less mandatory reporters as well. So we'll get there when a situation would have normally been reported weeks or months potentially prior to. But it's absolutely everywhere.
Didn't occur to me that we have a less number of mandated reporters in the summer. I mean, that makes perfect sense. They're out of school. Thank you for that. Let me add this as a pretty significant member of our, as a pretty significant member of our task force that was unable to be here tonight. The Child Advocacy Center is very active on our team, and they do a lot of amazing educational kinds of things with, it's like thousands of children that they talk to annually. And one of the components of their conversations with those kiddos is if you see violence, whether it's between your parents or, what they can do and the importance of them telling. Yes. And Sharon, you have your hand up.
It's a multifaceted question, but speaking to mandated reporters, if someone calls the DHS hotline to report something and it's not acted on because it's not the biggest fire on the stove, it's that low burning thing at the back of the stove, what's the best way to handle it? Because you get the abusive person who does the swagger of, they can do nothing, I can do this. And if you're in a situation where I've got to leave to protect myself and my children, and if you report things, then DHS and a lot of attorneys and judges tend to say, oh, you're just looking for something to use against him or her in the divorce. So how do we protect ourselves? How do we protect our children? How do we change the culture, if you will, or the mindset of attorneys, of DHS?
So phenomenal question, and it's
It's a great
definitely multifaceted. I think that at the core of everything we're doing here, it's education. With better understanding, we can identify, when they're separating, that 75 increase percentage of significant bodily injury, harm, homicide, whatever that may be. We can all say with that information in front of us, we can make an educated decision. So sometimes the burden of that is that attorney representing the half that's leaving. Hey, these are the statistics, whether they lean on our state partners or they lean on some of our many published articles there. I think that if I were in the shoes of somebody making a report, I will absolutely tell you any government institution of any size or capacity, the squeaky wheel will ultimately get the grease. And I say that to say one call to the hotline will bring the attention to the system of cogs and wheels and agents and people notifying other people. And sometimes, and complicated answer, but sometimes we'll get a situation where it doesn't necessarily meet the threshold for an investigation. However, what normally happens is down the line, a notification to the local law enforcement agency will come through with, hey, this report was screened out for X reason. Normally it'll be related to an improper location or not enough information to investigate properly. And very common for us to do a quick search of our own internal records, our own knowledge on people who may be involved, and then immediately reopen that. Now I'll tell you that process is not quick. So if I were calling and I have first or second-hand information, I would also, if I wanted an immediate reaction, I would notify law enforcement, as we're equipped for a 24-hour response. And most law enforcement agencies have the tools or work with partners that they are able to provide resources that we ourselves may not be able to do.
Well, I think that's a good segue into introducing China Scott. And, unless there's additional comments from other panel members, great job answering a really good and difficult question. Yeah, how do we change the culture? That's all of it. This is how we do it. We come together in a little town hall meeting and talk about it. China, I have a question for you. What resources and services does Washington Family Center provide Washington Family Services provide to our community?
So we have a variety of services. I'll do my best to try to summarize them. We have our 24-hour emergency shelter for victims who are fleeing a domestic violence situation. They can access the shelter by calling our hotline, where a victim advocate will be there to answer any questions. We also have our transitional housing program, which is for victims who are continuing on their journey of domestic violence, and they're able to stay in our transitional house up to a year. And we just ask that they provide like toiletry items and food items. And we also have like a savings account program, so they're able to kind of build that cushion back, of funds. And then we also have free counseling services as well. We have a counselor who's on staff who is EMDR certified. We also have rapid rehousing services as well. That program, we're able to rehouse our victims and assist them with rental assistance, security deposits. We build a relationship with landlords, so we're kind of that in between, so that way they can, kind of continue on their journey of independence and getting their life back. So, and we also have court advocacy as well, and we also assist our victims with filling out orders of protections.
Anybody got any questions for China? We're so grateful. Yeah, we really are. And Angela Stein is here. She is the mental health professional that was referenced by China as someone who's available to see those participants in the shelter, but also participants who are not in the shelter who are experiencing domestic violence.
Right, in the community, if you've experienced abuse of any kind in the lifespan, not just an emergency, those services are free. So,
We are so grateful for them.
We love the
When we look
yeah.
at years behind and we,
Yeah,
we're so grateful
yeah,
to you guys.
yeah. Thank you, Angela and China. I think we've already answered the question, maybe, about what happens when you call the hotline, but China, because could you repeat a little bit kind of that process?
Yes, so once a victim calls the hotline, and that number is 501-865-3939, we do have a victim advocate or shelter manager available 24 hours a day to answer the phone. We just assess the situation. We want to know if are they safe? Are they able to talk to us right now? Do they need to seek medical attention? If they do, we advise that they call 911. Are they able to get to our safe location? We want to know if they're bringing children with them. Do we have the availability? And then, like I said, back to the safe spot, we want to know if they're able to get to our safe spot. Do they have transportation? So we asked all of those questions just to kind of prepare for them to come to our shelter.
Okay. Thank you. And I know, Detective Plummer, you answered part of the question about what happens if somebody in our community is being victimized in the domestic, and they call the police department. And then the second piece to this is if they go to the hospital, if they go to the ER, and are you guys called to investigate or?
Absolutely. So, excuse me. In my role, I will generally be notified in the instance of significant injury. Normally, a hospital visit would coincide with that. What that would entail, my priorities are always preservation of life, safety. As we start our investigation, we kind of begin at how these injuries occurred and what we can do to prevent them from continuing. We are able to make a probable cause warrantless arrest within a certain amount of time frame based upon physical injury. So normally by the time that we have detectives responding, we have some sort of notification process or general description, location, vehicle that this perpetrator, this person who was responsible maybe in or driving at it. A big component there too, we deal with a lot of children, so we want to make sure, if they have any shared children, are they safe? Is there anybody that this offender is responsible for that we need to rush, personnel to make sure those other people are safe? But it does involve a lot of questions. Most of our officers have had some domestic violence, either on the spot, kind of field training officer style training, or have attended either the conference, which I went to the last one, which I was very happy with. A lot of good resources to take back. But so we'll ask those questions, we'll photograph and document injuries, and we'll make plans and make sure they're aware of what our next steps are.
And Lee, I wonder if maybe you could speak a little bit about trauma and the impact, and when someone is battered or is a victim of violence, or even fear-based. Could you talk just for a minute about I know this would be a 2-hour conversation, but could you speak to trauma for a minute for us?
Oh my goodness.
You've got
That's
1
the
minute.
Pandora's box for certain. Kind of speaking to if they come to the hospital, in my previous lives in other states, I would go and assess people in the emergency department. And frequently you would have the perpetrator in the room with the person, not allowing the person to answer questions. So that's a huge red flag. And, we've not just in this state, but in many states have done a really good job of educating emergency personnel that the number one thing is to somehow get that person separated so that you can get honest answers. One thing that most of my clients struggle with is, oh, it wasn't that bad. This is not trauma. And like when we have groups, oh, what they're going through is so much bigger than me. Why am I even asking for help? And a lot of that comes from verbal abuse. Why are you complaining? That's no big deal. But, you know, it's, my favorite question to ask is, okay, this is going on. If on the very first date, this person treated you like that, would there have been a second? And that is a huge eye-opener question, and they're like, oh my gosh, so I guess it is abuse, because no, it would not be acceptable on the second date. And, you know, and so then they start questioning themselves, oh my gosh. And then that's just kind of a little door I can open and, okay, let's get some help. But trauma takes all forms: verbal, emotional, mental, sexual. And a lot of times, especially people in an intimate partner relationship, deny that there's any sexual trauma. And no means no means no. It does not matter the relationship. And another one is no means no the first time. If you say no for 3 hours and then finally give in and say yes, that's still rape. And, you know, and just being able to help those people understand it is trauma what you're going through. And you just have learned to minimize it and say it's no big deal, but it is a big deal. My second question I asked them is, if a stranger came into your house and did this, what would you call them? They're like, yeah, you're right, that's trauma. I wouldn't let a stranger come in and do this. And, you know, and then, of course, the cycle of abuse that just continues and continues and continues. And I'm like, you know, it breaks my heart, but things like this and meeting with other people, that we're all on the same team and we can do this. Just today, I begged someone to go to the shelter. Made a promise, as soon as we hang up, I'm gonna call. I get an email. Okay, so I was calling and it rang 4 times, and then the person beeped in and they made all these promises and they said, you know, they're pretty good at keeping their promises, so I'm gonna stay for them. You know, and that one part of me that's like, just wants to give up. I'm like, okay, this is just the first step. We just opened the door a little bit.
Thank you, Lee. I think you really kind of explained, I think, why it's hard for victims to leave the first time, maybe, or the second time, but maybe through the guidance that can come from counseling. And you can open that little door for them to see realistically what's happening. I appreciate your thoughts. You know, one of the things we've been very interested in on the task force, and I'll give Sharon Parrott credit for bringing this to our attention, but and this is a question for you, Ms. Michelle. What are current laws and policies that that are in place regarding responding to the domestic violence in Arkansas? And then I think Sharon specifically would want me to mention some concerns that we've had about the 50-50 custody law. Is that the name of it? And so I wonder if you could address not just that law, but other laws that maybe as a community, we can come together and become advocates when our legislators are meeting and write letters and all that kind of stuff.
Well, I don't know much about the 50-50 because I don't practice domestic law. I basically just practice criminal law. But I do know that from the 27 years that I've been here, the laws have become stronger. When you have domestic battery, where there's just physical injury, that's generally a misdemeanor under Arkansas law. But if an individual commits that act again and has a conviction for that misdemeanor, it is now a felony. Also, we can enhance that if it happens to a child or in front of a child, which we all know happens very, very frequently. Those cases, of course, are difficult to prove because, as we all know, it's kind of like child abuse. It all happens behind closed doors.
They fell down the stairs.
Yes, and we would often treat strangers better than we see, you know, those relationships behind closed doors. So they have improved. They're not quite what I wish they would be. I can tell you that in recent legislation, domestic battery first, and which is where you have serious physical injuries, those have gone on list where the offenders are in jail and they do more time before they're parole eligible. So we do have a little bit more teeth in that area. Predominantly in Arkansas, in domestic relation situations where you have a divorce, generally the mother had the right to the child, and the presumption was that the mother had primary custody of the children. In recent years, thanks to legislation by some senators, it is now, the presumption is 50-50. So if you have a divorce, and the judges can stray from this, but based upon the evidence, but if you have a divorce, generally the father's entitled to 50% of the custody of the child, and the mother 50% of the custody of the child. So I think that there are some built-in issues with that, but I have no personal knowledge of it. I do have my personal opinion about it. I am a mother.
And I guess our concern is if there had been previous allegations of
Yes.
domestic violence toward the mom.
Yes.
What kind of an impact will that have on the family, on the children? And I know, we bring this up only because I think the more, there's power in numbers, and I know we would like to identify legislation or laws that maybe we all need to be more aware of, and as a group, make sure we communicate what we need in our community, and what we have going on, yeah.
But yes, those convictions could be used in those situations where there is a divorce, things of that nature. So, but I think, as Ms. Sharon pointed out, you have attorneys who argue both sides of it, which is what they're paid to do and what the process is. So, but they can definitely be used to help a judge determine if a parent is a proper party to have custody of a child.
Anybody got any questions about that? Okay. And so, Ashley, I have you on board for a question. Ashley Walker. And I put you there, for the first question. We're kind of moving into another section. Our time is ticking away. And so, this is where I think we all participate in what the answer is. But I have Ashley down in terms of, you see communities all over the state, and what communities are doing to kind of address some of the issues you've heard us talk about today. What kinds of things do you see that we might could do to address this in our community?
I am always so impressed with Hot Springs. You guys are like on it, and I love it. And so every time somebody says something to me, I'm like, call Hot Springs. They're doing it right. They're doing it right. No, I think as long as you are bringing awareness, right? Because like we say, domestic violence thrives in silence, period. So the more we get out and talk about it, and the more we, have groups and communities that are saying, no, this isn't right. No, this isn't what we're going to allow in our community. We're going to take a stand. I think that's amazing. And I think that's really, really kind of putting teeth into saying, absolutely not in this community. We're not going to do that. You're not ever going to eradicate domestic violence. It's really kind of one of those things that's always going to thrive in silence. And you can't just say, we're going to just get rid of it at one point, right? Everybody's going to be their own human, and they're going to make their own choices. And sometimes those choices are not exactly great. But I think you guys are doing an amazing job. I'm always so proud of Hot Springs. I love y'all. Y'all do it great.
Thank you. One of the things on the task force I think that we are aware of is the shame that comes being involved in a domestic violence situation. And that's a cultural shift that we are working really hard at doing, and that is recognizing that domestic violence, there is no income level, there's no race, there's no age, it knows no particular person. And we want to eliminate the shame factor so that people that are in these situations can recognize that as a community, we are here. And we will not judge and put the shame behind you and come forward and approach some of us here in the room and ask for help. So thank you, Ashley. a question that I've got is, we're trying, I think we do a good job of being a coordinated community. We do. And so, we want to move in that direction of getting better. Yeah. And so,
One thing I wanted to mention, and I really want to commend our local law enforcement because at the beginning of my career, these cases were mainly he said, she said. That's what they were. And we've really, law enforcement has really worked with the prosecutor's office and trying to obtain and work up cases where we can have victimless crimes, where we can prove, the statistics show that because of the time frame it takes from an incident occurring and it getting to trial, especially a felony, is in this day and age over a year and a half. So a lot happens. And so law enforcement has to really put their nose to the grindstone and get a case that a prosecutor is able to prosecute without a victim present. And I really want to commend our local law enforcement because they have really wholeheartedly bought into that. And they work really hard to make that happen so that at the end of the day, even when a victim does get back in the cycle and goes back, there is a consequence for that action. So, and that's all because of their hard work that we're able to do that.
well, and I'll add to that, being at the college, I do know that I've had students who experienced a violent episode on the weekend. And law enforcement was involved. And one of the things I appreciated so much about our police here in Hot Springs is not only did they provide that support for her, they linked her to a resource, our shelter, on a Saturday. And I think that's, it's not just putting together a good case, it's also making sure that that person was safe that minute, that kind of thing. And so I'll add to that.
Well, I'm glad you did because providing those services is more important, I think, just as important, but more important in that moment in providing things to that victim so they don't feel the shame and they feel understood
Kind of a
and
safe
they feel
handle,
accepted and safe.
a safe handle.
And I'll add to that, it's a real testament to how well you guys work together, because it's not, it's not across all communities where law enforcement and prosecutors have such a good relationship. And so when you have that good relationship, that just makes that victimless prosecution that much easier for you guys. So having that is an amazing thing to have in your community. So I really commend you all on having that
We're very
relationship.
fortunate.
Yeah.
Well, and so our time is about up, and so, what can we do as a community? I think we're doing it. I think we're doing it. We're stopping the silence that conceals the violence. We're communicating with each other and handing off pamphlets or resources and making sure I've watched our prosecutor work with our folks who have resources available and make sure that we're all on the same page as best as we can be. Because like I say, it's a very complicated situation, but I really appreciate y'all being here. Is there anybody in the audience that has a question at this time?
I would just like to add one thing, but ask your questions before.
Yeah. Okay, well, Lee?
This is just a matter of verbiage, but we want to help empower the person. So it is better to refer to the person as a survivor. Victim is a word associated with the perpetrator, and it's a very shaming kind of word. And so we want to empower the survivor that, I did survive this. I'm no longer in that victim's stance. And, it's just a change of vocabulary, but I've seen the difference when I've encouraged my clients to themselves refer to themselves as a survivor. And it's like, you're right, I am living, I am breathing, I did survive.
It's empowering.
Yeah.
Thank you for that, Lee. That's excellent point. It's that empowerment. It's, it really is. But anyway, thanks you guys so much for being here. I want to thank Aubrey Spear, the Garland County Library, who asked us to come and then did the work. Thank you so much, Aubrey. So we'll wrap this up. Thank you.